This month on the podcast, we've been diving into relationships because let's be real, they impact everything when it comes to the balance in our lives. And of course, I couldn't talk about relationships without talking about one of the most important relationships we have as moms, our relationship with our kids. Being a mom is hands down one of my most favorite things in life. It's also one of the hardest. There's no handbook, no performance review to tell you how you're doing or if you're even doing it right. But every day, I just really try to do a little better than the day before. At some point, honestly, I don't even remember how, but Russ and I discovered the Calm Parenting podcast, and I immediately started following Kirk. I've always been drawn to positive parenting because I don't want to be the yeller. Now, that's not to say I never lose my cool. I'm human, and my kids, very much normal kids with big personalities, very strong opinions, and their fair share of challenges. But Kirk's approach has really helped us so much. So I reached out to him and asked if he would come on the show and share his wisdom with all of you. And I'm so grateful he said yes because I know that this conversation is going to resonate with so many of you. If you're raising a strong willed kid, you already know that traditional parenting tricks just don't work. And in this 3-part series, I'm sitting down with Kirk, the host of the Calm Parenting podcast, to get real about what it's like to parent these determined little humans. Kirk has cracked the code on what actually works. We're talking real life, practical strategies that help you stop those daily power struggles, get your kids to possibly actually listen and bring some much needed peace back into your home. This is part 1 of a 3-part series where we'll tackle why typical punishments don't work, how to shift your parenting approach, and how to turn that stubborn streak into a superpower. So whether you've got a toddler who refuses to put on their pants or a teen who argues every rule, this series is packed with relatable stories and strategies that you could actually start using today. And here's the thing, so much of what Kirk and I talk about in this series ties back to boundaries because let's be real, strong-willed kids will push every single boundary you set. And if you don't have clear, firm, and healthy boundaries in place, parenting them can feel impossible. That's exactly why I created my free guide, Boundaries Made Simple. If setting and actually sticking to boundaries, whether it's with your kids, your partner, or even at work, feels like a struggle, this freebie is for you. It'll help you create boundaries that actually work without feeling like the bad guy. So if you want to start taking back control of your time, your energy, and your sanity, grab your free copy now. The link is waiting for you in the show notes. Are you feeling overwhelmed trying to juggle all the many hats you wear as a working mom? Do you want more quality time with your family without distraction of work, with time alone to take care of yourself and your needs? Welcome to Mom Wife Career Life. I'm Carrie, a wife, mom of 3, and a recovering perfectionist. In this podcast, I will teach you how to create balance in your life by implementing healthy habits, organizing your home and your schedule, being intentional with your time and in your relationships, and most importantly, how to start putting your needs first because no one can pour from an empty cup. Grab that second cup of coffee, or if you're anything like me, your third. It's time to dive into today's episode of Mom Wife Career Life. With us today is the CelebrateCalm.com founder and Calm Parenting podcast host, Kirk Martin, who has shown almost 1 million parents how to stop the yelling, the defiance, and the power struggles with the most strong-willed children. Kirk is known for very practical strategies and scripts delivered with humor and, most importantly, compassion. Just to put that 1 million number into perspective, that would be filling up Madison Square Garden 50 times with the amount of parents that he's helped. And this week, he gets to add all of you to that list. Welcome to the show, Kirk. I am so excited to have you here. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you started the Calm Parenting podcast?
Carrie, I'm super excited to be here. So I'll give you short version, hopefully. My dad was career military, right? My way or the highway, tough guy approach. And so, you grow up, you have kids, and our firstborn, Casey, was a very strong-willed kid. And I always like to joke, he came out of the womb with boxing gloves on. And so I tried the my way or the highway approach with him, and it just backfired because strong-willed kids they will double down and like fight you harder. And so I tried to spend all this time, Carrie, trying to change him until I finally learned, oh, I'm the one who needs to change. I'm the one with control issues. I remember when he was little once, I was yelling at him and I was like, you need to calm down. And he's like, you don't even know how to calm down. And I was like, right? Like these kids are so smart. And so part of the process was me learning how to control my own emotions and learning that the quickest way to de-escalate a child, the quickest way to change their behavior is to first control my own. And so once we did that, I started volunteering in a school. We decided to invite these like really strong-willed kids, kids on the spectrum into our home. So the idea was we'd have 10, 12, 15 really challenging kids in our home. We would change plans on them at the last moment. We would disappoint them on purpose so they would melt down and fight with each other. It was awesome. And so the whole idea was, sitting one on one in a therapy office isn't real life, but being with a bunch of other kids and they take your Legos, well, now you've got to work on some skills. And so over the course of a decade, we had about 1,500 kids in our home where we would teach them like self control, impulse control, social skills in real life settings. And then, so after we did that, I was exhausted and we couldn't do that anymore. So I got invited to speak, train teachers, parents, and we did that for a long time. And then we just started speaking into a microphone and doing a podcast, I think in 2012. It was called Blog Talk Radio before podcasting was a word. And then we've kind of done it ever since. And like you, we found it's just such a great way to communicate with people.
It really is. It really is. So I love the term strong-willed kid because prior to hearing you say that term, I would just call them a pain in the butt, but I think that's such a better way to say it. But what exactly is a strong-willed kid?
Look, there's no like set definition. This is how I describe them. They tend to be very bright kids, but they tend to use their intelligence to argue with you. They're like little cops, judges, and attorneys all wrapped in one. These are kids who tend not to respond well to consequences. They don't care if you take away things so much. What they don't want is for you to take away their autonomy. They value independence. They want to touch the hot stove. They want to figure it out themselves. And then we as parents are like, well, buddy, I can show you a better way to do that. And they're like, I don't want to do it your stupid better way. I want to figure it out on my own, which is a great life skill to have. It's what we ultimately want strong to raise people who are very strong-willed and confident in the real world. We just don't want to parent them because they're hard to parent and they just won't do simple things you want to do your way. And we can talk about this, but when we control our own anxiety, get control of our own perfectionism and control issues, and give them what we would call ownership of their choices, but within our boundaries, these kids are amazing because they're really bright. They figure stuff out. They just won't ever do it the way you want it done. And so it's frustrating.
It's very frustrating. So you said they don't like consequences, which I feel this one very deeply. So I don't want to say how do you punish a strong-willed kid, but how do you discipline them if they just don't care about normal consequences that other kids would?
Okay. Well, think about this like in a bigger picture. Very few of us really change our behavior based on consequences. We know if we eat too much, eat the wrong foods, don't sleep, smoke, drink too much, all those things, they have like really dire consequences for that. And yet we don't really change our behavior as a whole, right? Because it's usually because there's something deeper going on. So I'm not huge into punishment because it just doesn't work with these kids either. So I think of it this way. When kids misbehave, they are, making a bad choice, they're misbehaving. Two ways to handle that. One is to react and say, "Hey, you cut that out or else," right? That's the if then. If you don't stop this, I'm going to take away X. Well, you're kind of punishing a kid for failing. And so what I like to do instead is say, okay, I know my child. My child struggles in this area, say with like impulse control. Well, kids are supposed to struggle with impulse control. You just don't want your husband struggling with impulse control and putting everything into Bitcoin, unless he bought low and sells high. But still, right? Kids are supposed to mess up. So I come alongside the child and say, hey, you've got a natural weakness in this area. Let me give you a few tools. Let me show you how to deal with your impulse control so that you don't lose all your stuff, right? Just like with emotional self-control, just saying like, "You need to calm down or you're gonna lose your video game." Well, now they're like, "Well, screw it. I'm already upset. You've already taken away everything. Like, why wouldn't I melt down more?" Instead, I'd rather come along and say, "Hey, you are going to get frustrated and disappointed in life. It's going to happen. Let me show you." Because discipline means actually to teach. And so let me teach you some different ways to handle life when things don't go your way. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that makes sense. But I know even having those conversations can be really difficult in the moment. So I know I've personally learned to try to take that step back and really take a pause when I'm too emotional and maybe come back to the conversation when it's not so emotionally charged. And I know a lot of parents are going to relate to this because I've heard it from a lot of moms. They could give the best advice to their kids, but the kids don't want to hear it. But if another adult says the exact same thing to them, it suddenly all makes sense to them. But when it comes from a parent, it's like, we don't know what we're talking about.
Because you're a mom, so your voice is annoying, right? So, okay, let me give you a couple examples. One is modeling, right? Like just model it yourself in life. Because if you're like flipping people off in traffic and you can't really control yourself, and you're like, well, honey, you need to be kind to others. And you're like, really, mom? Like you in traffic? And so modeling is important. I'll come back to some tools, but phrasing wise, I tend to deal with things after the child has calmed down and not in the moment. And especially as kids get a little bit older, what I like to say sometimes, this phrasing is something like, hey, something I've found in life is when I handle things this way, X way, it just tends to go better. And then I tend to walk out of the room. So I'm planting a seed because look, our kids are smart. They know right from wrong, which is why they lie, right? Little kid knows you can't play with the ball in the house, plays with the ball in the house, breaks the lamp. Who broke the lamp? My brother did. And you're like, you don't even have a brother, right? Our kids lie because they know what they did was wrong. They just need some tools to not do it. The whole idea, like, especially as kids get older, is hey, here's something I've discovered in life. And then you drop some wisdom, a truth of some kind. But I remove myself. That's a lot different than, honey, we need to have a talk. Let's sit down and have a family meeting and discuss your poor choices. Okay, I can't wait. Can we do that every night at 7 p.m.? Like, just like Carrie, you don't want your boss saying, what's the phrase? A mom just asked this one. She said, I think by now my kids should be able to handle a long conversation to talk about the ramifications of their choices. And I was like, who likes to have a long talk about right? You don't want your boss saying, hey, why don't we dissect everything you did wrong on that last project? You'd want your boss to say, hey, Carrie, what usually crush it in projects, that last proposal wasn't your best work, but I know that you're capable of much more. If you need some tools or some help, let me know. See, now with your boss, you're like, yeah, I already know I didn't do my best work. You don't want a 30-minute conversation detailing why your thinking was so bad. You and then there's an offer to if you need some help, because maybe you come a day later to your boss and say, hey, I didn't have the right information, or I need some new skills in this or new knowledge in this area. So does that make sense at all? Because I kind of like drop the wisdom, walk away. I'll give you one more. It's kind of like to stop lecturing. When your kids actually open up and tell you something, and you're like, oh, now it's a chance for lecture 43B, honey, on how to choose good friends. They don't want to hear it. So sometimes with older kids, I say, you know what? I appreciate you telling me that. I've got a few thoughts about that. If you want to come grab me later while I'm making dinner or when I'm in the garage, I'd love to share my ideas with you. See, there's an invitation, but now your child can come to you and say, okay, mom, what are your stupid ideas? Which is how they're going to ask. And then you have to be the grown up and not take it personally because they're never going to say, mom, You manage a career, you have a popular podcast, you clearly have so much wisdom. Could you please just tell me? So I prefer, like, if we go through kind of meltdowns or emotional kids, giving them space is really, really important because they have to process stuff and then come to it on their own rather than dumping a bunch of things on.
No, I think that's great advice. I'm just picturing the last kind of conversations I've had with my kids, but I've noticed that they're starting to open up more the less I don't wanna say the less I try to parent them, but the less I'm trying to fix things, especially my high schoolers, and especially from listening to your podcast because you give amazing advice. I feel like you're speaking to me half the time. I really tried to step back and let them mess up, and it's the hardest thing because I'm a recovering perfectionist, but I'm really just standing on the sidelines right now and just seeing what happens and hoping that they just learn from their mistakes, that they come to me when they need help, which I'm starting to see a little bit. But it's also very hard when you're in the moment to not speak passionately, I like to call it.
I care so much and I so want to help you.
I do. I'm like, I've made these mistakes in my life and I just want you to learn from me. I'm a coach. Let me coach you. It's really, really hard to take that step back, but I'm trying.
No, that's awesome. So I made a few notes while you were talking. So here's something, especially for like working moms, is try this for a week. Talk to your kids kind of like they're your colleagues at work. Because your colleagues at work, you don't sit them down and talk in this really kind of condescending, mommy tone, right? You just talk to them and say, hey, here's exactly what, like with a peer or someone, a subordinate, maybe someone working under you, you just talk an even matter of fact tone. Hey, here's what I'm expecting. Here are your deliverables for the next week, whatever it is, and try that with the kids. And when someone messes up, you're not like, I can't believe that you would make that choice at work. You just talk to them like adults. And so that helps a little bit with that. I'd say I wrote down even sometimes like with our son, look, here's the part of the hard part for you, Carrie, and a lot of working moms is you are very, very successful in your work, which means you're conscientious and you're detailed, you make good choices and you plan it out. You're a good thinker. And then you come to kids and you're like, you need to be like me. Like you're going to make these hard choices, but that's partly your own anxiety about their future, right? Like, well, if they don't make this good choice while they're 16, it's going to sabotage which college they get into, and then they won't get to be able to get the right job. And then nobody's going to marry them and they won't be successful. Like, right? We project into the future. So here's something to practice for moms and dads listening to this. For the next couple days, walk into a room, sit down. Sitting is a magical thing because when you're standing, you want to use your hands and your arms and your lecture, and you're more interested in lecturing and talking. Sit in a room and purposefully don't fix the situation. Instead, ask questions. Be really curious. Hey, you just told me that. So I'm curious. What was the thought process? What were you thinking about when you were making that choice or talking to your friend like that? And then listen to them. And they'll tell you things as long as they know you're not going to jump in. Well, honey, I think the better way to handle this would have been X, Y, and Z. I'm out, right? Like, listen and do more of that, like drawing to you. Hey, that was interesting. I've got to go do X. Let them come to you and maybe have even a tradition like our son, he was like he was an old soul from a young age. He liked drinking coffee. When he wanted to have a talk, he'd say, Mom, it feels like a Dunkin' Donuts afternoon. And they would go, it was when we lived near this Dunkin' Donuts, and they would sit and have coffee and talk because she created an environment in which he could talk without her jumping in. Does that make sense at all?
No, that makes complete sense. And that's honestly what I started to do with both of my girls, which with my oldest, Ashley, she loves to go to coffee shops. So that's my one on one time with her. And I absolutely love it. But no, I totally get this approach. But at times it's just very difficult because you just want to fix things. And exactly what you were explaining about the anxiety of their future. I was just talking to a friend last week about this, and he was saying the same thing. his kid struggles in a class and failed a test because he, like most kids, waited until 9 o'clock the night before the test to start studying. And my friend was like, he failed another test. Now he's not going to get into college and he's going to live at home forever. And he's always going to have a messy room. And it's like you start this spiral of negative thoughts. But then I think about myself. I was a very strong willed kid. My dad parented me a lot different than the way we parent these days. I didn't always get hundreds on my tests. I wasn't always the most respectful kid. I didn't always clean my room. Actually, I think I did clean my room just because I like to be in a neat area, but I didn't do everything my parents asked me to do. And I think I turned out pretty okay. But I think that's where a lot of parents struggle. That if you're not punishing your kids, then you're not teaching them consequences. And the real challenge is when you have multiple kids and you have to parent each one of them differently. And one kid really responds well to consequences while the other really couldn't care less. And that's when it's, wait, why did I get in trouble and he didn't? And it looks like you're favoring one kid over the other. So it's that really difficult dynamic.
So a couple things. I would say give the consequence to each of what is different is I just don't expect consequences with strong-willed kids to actually change their behavior, right? So you give the consequence, right? Like if your child comes home late after curfew with the car, you're not like, well, you're just strong-willed. That's okay. No, you lost the car for 3 days. But I don't expect them next time they're out having fun with their friends and it's 9:53 and they're supposed to be home at 10. My full expectation is that they will text, Mom, can I have 15 extra minutes? Can I have 30 extra minutes? Like, that's what they're supposed to do, right? So some of it is we're freaks of like, well, why doesn't she respect my curfew? Because they're like 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. Like, their job is to push the limits. And your job is to say, like, I remember the first time Casey came home and it was same thing, car, push the limits. And all I did, because we had an agreed upon thing, if you miss curfew, it is 3 days with no car. And when he walked in that night, I wanted to lecture because we all have those lectures. And I just said, keys on the table, hand me your license when you're ready. And that's it. And he was like, "Seriously, dad? Seriously?" And he wanted to draw in, but I like doing no drama, right? Because we often get in, you know what? If you would have come home when I told you, you wouldn't have to, like, none of the snotty stuff. When I discipline, I just try to do as little drama as possible, knowing they're going to be filled with drama and your daughter's going to huff and puff and say that you're stupid and her friends' parents don't make them do that. Like, right? Like, that's what they're supposed to do. So you can give the consequence. It's just the next day when she comes, says, Mom, I was with my friends and say, okay, so let's role play that. Like that's literally like if you want to punish your kids, so to speak, make them role play with you because it's horrid and nobody enjoys it. But role playing is physically practicing new behavior. Like you could do it and say, I want you to go out tonight just down the street and it's 9:45 and you're blah 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 and walk through the situation. Like I used to do that. I'll give you a quick one. Casey would have like a bad attitude toward me, right? Like talking with that ugly attitude. You have every right to say, young man, young lady, you're not going to talk to me like that. But one of the times I did that when Casey was little, he was like, just did, because he was a really strong willed little jerk. Then he knew I would blow up. And so eventually I just said, hey, Case, when I hear that tone in your voice, it's usually when you're anxious, you're frustrated, or you're hungry. So at the beginning of this, what I'm doing is teaching him his trigger. See, that's teaching. Just saying, like, you're not going to use that kind of tone with me. If I would have used that tone with my father, I would have gotten backhanded, blah, blah, blah. They don't care. Now I'm teaching, hey, I've heard this tone before. Usually it comes when you're anxious because a lot of our kids struggle with anxiety. You're frustrated, things didn't go your way, or you're just plain hungry and you need a Snickers bar, right? And so then I would give him an option. Look, you've got two options right now. You may continue to talk to me like that if you want, but you know what happens? You just lose your license, your video games. It's just not going to end well for you. And so you can even hear in that tone, it's kind of a resigned, no energy tone. It's just not going to work, right? Like with a daughter, it's like, it's just not going to work. But, and the energy goes to problem solving. And so, look, your audience is working moms and dads. So at work, you problem solve. We're having an issue. Sales are down. The project is late. Just going in and saying, I don't understand why the project is late. Who didn't meet the timeline? Right? Like, but that's what it sounds like to our kids. Instead, we walk in and say, okay, we are now behind 3 days on this project. Let's problem solve. Where did the process break down? And you're not shaming people like, well, why didn't you do your job on time? No, you're like, okay, where did it break down? Now, what are the action steps we can put in place so we can get back on the timeline? And now you've empowered everyone to start fixing it rather than just shaming and lecturing them. So my thing with Casey was, hey, you can talk to me like that if you want, but if you want to grab some chips, I'll grab some salsa. I'll meet you out on the deck. I'll help you with whatever you're struggling with. So there's an invitation to problem solve, but now we've moved. And from our podcast, I use that motion changes emotion. Like I think you have daughters. There is no way I'm going toe to toe, a mom and daughter looking at each other. All you're going to notice is each other's rolling your eyes at each other, the little silent huffs and sighs. Your daughters will see your disappointment on your face and they'll react to, Mom, why are you yelling at me? And you're like, I'm not even yelling at you yet, but they feel that. Another one, Carrie, I love, and then I'll shut up, is coloring. Next time you have any kind of confrontation with your teenage daughters, sit at the kitchen table and literally start coloring. It is impossible to yell at people while you're coloring. And they're going to look at you like, what are you doing? And we're like, well, usually I lecture for about 15 minutes and use my mommy tone. And I found you don't really respond well to that. So I just thought I'd color. And if you want to come color with me, if you get two people sitting down coloring, you're probably going to talk to each other because then there's also not eye contact. And that's another big one with strong-willed kids. When they're upset, I don't look them in the eyes because they're usually embarrassed about their behavior and it just escalates things. So you sit down and you start coloring, or my son and I would eat chips and salsa. Well, you never see two people eating chips and salsa yelling at each other, right? Like you have a couple margaritas, everybody's happy. It changes the dynamic. So I'll wrap it up with this. Moms and dads, you can change the dynamic of your child more quickly by controlling yourself than by controlling their attitude and their words and their behavior. And your kids usually, your strong-willed daughter knows the right answer. She just wants to come to it on her own rather than listening to my mom, my annoying podcasting coach mom tell me. Just the way it works.
So true. So true. This is a great place for us to pause today, but don't go too far because this conversation is just getting started. Make sure you come back tomorrow for part 2, where Kirk and I dive deeper on how to set those boundaries, how to hold those limits without the power struggles, and actually get your strong-willed kids to listen without losing your minds. In the meantime, if you want more of Kirk's incredible parenting wisdom, go check out the Calm Parenting Podcast, and you can learn more about what he has to offer at celebratecalm.com. Trust me, you will absolutely love his approach as much as I do. And if you don't already follow the show, take a second and hit that follow button so you never miss another episode. Sending you so much love and light until next time on Mom Wife Career Life with Carrie Pat. Before you go, if you found this podcast helpful, I would be so grateful if you would take a minute, go on over to iTunes and leave me a review. If you have other stressed out mamas in your life that you feel this podcast could help, take a screenshot of this episode, post it on your Instagram stories and tag me, and let them know that they are not alone and they can create balance in their life too. If there's a topic you'd like me to cover or you just want to connect, DM me on Instagram at mom.wife.career.life. Or come on over and hang out in our free Facebook community, Work-Life Balance for Working Moms. Sending you so much love and light until next time on Mom Wife Career Life with Carrie Pat.